Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1968 period piece horror film titled The Witchfinder General, or on North American soil, they changed the name of the title to The Conqueror Worm. But I think I prefer the name The Witchfinder General a whole lot better. Now, the runtime for this movie is 1 hour and 26 minutes long. It is directed by Michael Reeves. The script was written by Michael Reeves and Tom Baker, not to be confused with the Doctor Who Tom Baker, who was the Doctor from 1974 to 1981. I think he was the longest serving actor to play the Doctor. It is based off of the novel Witchfinder General by Ronald Bassett. It is produced by Louis M. Hayward, Philip Wadilove, and Arnold Miller. It is composed by Paul Ferris, the cinematography by John Coquillon, and it was edited by Howard Lanning. And the stars of the movie are Vincent Price, who next week, on October 25th, will mark the 30th anniversary of his death. Also, 30 years ago on this day, on October 25th, 1993, was also the same day as when River Phoenix, I believe he passed out at the Viper Room in Los Angeles and apparently succumbed to his death. So, two big tragic deaths between two big name Hollywood stars passed away. One had a fulfilling life, and one had a life taken from them way too early. Also joining the cast is Ian Ogilvy, who, from what I gather, I believe of all the major stars in this movie, he is actually the only actor who's still alive as we speak. Of the major principal stars in the movie. I don't know if all of them are, but all I know is he's the only one who's still alive, who's still with us. Also joining the cast includes Hilary Dwyer, Rupert Davies, Robert Russell, Patrick Wymark, Nicky Henson, Wilfrid Brambell, Tony Selby, Bernard Kay, Godfrey James, Michael Beint, John Trenaman, Bill Maxwell, Paul Ferris, Maggie Kimberly, and Margaret Nolan. Since the golden age of Hollywood, the horror genre never gets the respect and admirations from the upper echelons of the film industry. And though over the years many have been overlooked as trash, campy, over the top, one big barrage of horror, cheap horror effects and jump scares, I will have to say many of these movies are actually trash. Sometimes they fall in the category of they're so bad it's good. And maybe they may score well in the box office, or maybe they don't. But then when they get distributed, they might end up becoming a cult classic among a group of another generation. But yeah, a lot of horror films are regarded as mindless trash. But there are some that have hidden, deeply rooted philosophical themes behind it, showing that they're not all entirely brainless popcorn flicks that you could just suspend your disbelief and you can actually find some intelligent merit behind it. Surprisingly, some hold up to this day and have become trailblazers and inspirations for future filmmakers who take these archaic ideas and utilize their predecessors' work to create refreshingly new original content to please their fan base. And although he's been known collectively as the King of Horror and other such monikers, under the types of films he has starred in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, maybe even well into the 70s, and up until his last movie, which was Edward Scissorhands, Vincent Price has embellished his career by making creative, provocative, and shocking films that may generate thrills, unpredictable and memorial scenes, and will definitely find many ways to send chills down your spine. His films were solely for you to enjoy. He embraced the campiness. He embraced the whole idea of being over the top. He made horror films fun to watch. I mean, he's like right up there with the Bela Lugosi, Max Schreck, Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, you name it. These are all horror gods. And Vincent Price is right up there. But this movie, The Witchfinder General, we see a movie where Vincent Price is doing everything in his power to make you not enjoy this movie. This is not a feel-good movie. This is not something that is to be taken easily and to just let your mind relax. When Mr. Price was under contract with American International Pictures in the 60s, his act would evolve into more serious fare and showed a more intense look into his villainy, and he became less of a caricature, but was not as featured as a performer like his other contemporaries. Is that for the better or for the worse? To me, it might be a little bit of both. As maybe we have gone past the whole campy, over-the-top stuff like The House on Haunted Hill, or House of Wax, or The Pit and the Pendulum, or any of the other stuff that he collaborated with Roger Corman with the whole Edgar Allan Poe phenomena. No, this is not for the faint of heart. And Vincent Price took that role with him and created a darker side to his already macabre campiness. But it's not filled with over the top enlightenment. He's getting more and more serious with his material, and his villainy is becoming more effective, albeit more authentic. So in 1968, Price would star in two movies that solidified him more as a serious character villain and not a cartoon-like replica. Those two movies are The Fall of the House of Usher and the one I'm reviewing, The Witchfinder General. Or to stay on the traditional Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe formula, which they called The Conqueror Worm. They made us think, oh, this is another Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe, Vincent Price starring vehicle. But they really put that in incognito because Corman had no involvement in this movie, and this was not actually based off of an Edgar Allan Poe short story. This is actually based off of a novel in 1966 by an author named Ronald Bassett. Now, The Witchfinder General does have the same type of atmosphere that was featured in those Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. Both films that Price have starred in featured a soon-to-be married couple who are in pursuit of a masterful individual. Witchfinder General of the two, Witchfinder General has a more aggressive tone, not an easy sitting movie where you could just sit down and relax your thoughts. I mean, after watching this movie, you may probably want to turn over to YouTube and watch a cute little animal video. Whether you're a cat lover, or a dog lover, or a rabbit lover, or whatnot, you may probably want to look at something after watching this movie, because this movie is not for the faint of heart. There is no feel-good moment to it. It's intense. It's unpredictable. And it's a little bit barbaric to the eyes. It's not laboring, but it's cruel. Both films also has an attractive young woman falling prey to the sexual wrath of Price's characters. When Witchfinder General came out, it was met with a lot of negative responses from the viewing audience, as it was bombarded with controversy regarding the content of the film being unsettling, unpleasant, and inaccurate in its historical context. Well, for all you historical purists out there, I got news for you. This is not an accurate historical account. It's a work of fiction. Yes, it has real characters in this movie, but they are being fictionalized. It's called artistic license. And we have characters. I mean, sure, there was a Matthew Hopkins. There was a John Stern and an Oliver Cromwell, and yes, even an Elizabeth Clark. But they are not played in historical context. It's still a work of fiction. It has real characters, but it's a fictional movie. Now, yes, I agree. It is unsettling. I mean, people were expecting to see another Vincent Price hamming it up stuff. But here he wasn't hamming things up. He wasn't trying to sell products or to be commercialized or to be campy. He's very intense here. Unpleasant? Oh, of course it's unpleasant. But then again, the real Matthew Hopkins was a very unpleasant individual. So Price actually got it down pat. Even though it's fictional, Matthew Hopkins was an unpleasant individual. And Price is doing everything he can to make his character a very unpleasant asshole. And if you read about the real Matthew Hopkins, there's a lot of great rich text about him and about his reputation as being a witch hunter or a superior witch hunter. And he labeled himself a Witchfinder General. Like he's like right up there. And I will get into a lot of the historical backstory of Matthew Hopkins, because it's set in the time period. It's got real characters. It was set at a time when witch hunting was quite prevalent in Great Britain at the time, while a civil war was going on, as a question of whether or not the monarchy should remain in Great Britain or if it should be expunged. They almost succeeded, but then it was rejuvenated during the Stuart Restoration. There's a lot of historical history that's going on here, but you won't find it in Ronald Bassett's novel, and you won't find it in this movie directed by the late young prodigy named Michael Reeves. Yes, a bit of a sad story about him is that this was the last movie he ever made before his unfortunate death in 1969 at the very young age of only 25 years old. I'm probably going to delve more into that in a bit, because there's a lot of stuff that was happening off camera as there was on camera, especially between the star Vincent Price and the director Michael Reeves. The movie itself is a historical take on an actual moment in British history that while a civil war was going on, there were actually 3 civil wars that were going on, and I believe it went between the years 1639 to 1651, although it was like broken up into like 3 different intervals. I believe this was during the time when it was the parliamentarians were taking on the royalists. The royalists were like those who were still thinking that the monarchy should be the head of government, while the parliamentarians, I should say, were thinking of eradicating the monarchy and that Britain should be ruled by government. I mean, a leader who is not an inheritance. Someone who was not born in royalty should be a leader. And the parliamentarianism, I believe, was led by Oliver Cromwell, and it had to be due to the corruption of King Charles I, because apparently Great Britain did not have much faith in this. Did not have much faith in this king. So it was a question of whether they wanted to keep this guy in the throne or just simply have him executed. But of course, while this was happening, there was of course the witch trials that was also taking place. I believe the whole idea came during the Elizabethan era, during Queen Elizabeth I's era, where she wanted to rid of all the potential suspicious people who might be witches. But even though it sometimes was hard to determine who was a witch and who wasn't. I mean, when people think of the witch trials, everybody thinks United States, Salem, Massachusetts. Well, before the Salem witch trials, the witch trials were happening in Great Britain during the 1600s, the 17th century. And one of the most notorious witch hunter was Matthew Hopkins. Now, Matthew Hopkins was only a witchfinder between 1645 and up to 1647. And if memory serves me correctly, he was a witch hunter or witchfinder for only 14 months. Now you're thinking, oh, I guess he probably didn't do very much during those 14 months, huh? Well, you're wrong. In fact, during those 14 months, he convicted 320 people who he suspected were witches. And how he determined who was a witch and who it wasn't, they had to go through several cruel barbaric initiatives. And such initiatives included the swimming test. If you sunk to the bottom of the ocean, then you're not a witch. But if you should swim or happen to stay afloat, then you could be accused of being a witch. And Matthew Hopkins can pick his poison as to how he could execute you. So the ones who were not convicted of witches who sunk, well, they practically drowned to death. And those who stayed afloat, well, they're going to get some form of retribution. So no matter what, if you're convicted of being a witch, you're practically fucked. Pick your poison, folks. You'll either sink, swim, and be dead. Either way, you're gonna have a lot of fun, huh? Okay, I'm just getting a little carried away. But yeah, that's what he was like. Of course, there could have been a little bit of a miscasting with Vincent Price being cast as Matthew Hopkins, because the real Matthew Hopkins actually died at a relatively young age. He was about 28. And no, he didn't die the same way like he did in the movie. Nah, he died a boring way. He just got sick with tuberculosis and took a perpetual hell trip. I'm going to tell you more about his comeuppance. The other real character was John Stern. Now, both Matthew Hopkins and John Stern worked for each other. The only thing was that in the movie, Matthew Hopkins was the superior officer and John Stern was the junior assistant. But in reality, Stern, who was actually several years older than Matthew Hopkins, he was actually the superior one. But I guess since casting Vincent Price, who was much older than Robert Russell, he was superior. And like I said, a bit of a miscast because the real Matthew Hopkins was 29. Vincent Price, when he made the movie, he was born 1911. But the movie was filmed around 67. So I guess I would roughly say he was about 56 years old when he was cast. Yeah, you get that. I mean, to be honest with you, Michael Reeves, who directed the movie, didn't even want Vincent Price. He actually wanted Donald Pleasence. Even Donald Pleasence, if he would have been cast, he was like, he was born 1920, so back in 68, he was about 48. He might have been a little bit younger, but still a little miscast there. Anyhow. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Hopkins was not, a very nice man. And that's putting it blunt and vague. He was a cruel, vicious tyrant who took pride in his job. Too much pride. I mean, he was doing this not just for the money, but also he also thought he was a Lothario. And sometimes even these witches that he accused, well, let's just say he also got his sexual kicks in with these alleged witches. Oh, yeah. They had a party for two in the bedroom. I'm trying to keep a clean show here, but yeah, he asked for a few sexual favors from them too. Have sex, die, collect your fee, and move on to another city or another town. and just eat, sleep, conquer, repeat. Rifle, gun, shooting, fun. I'm trying to run a clean show here, folks. But unfortunately, this movie is not clean fun. I wish it was. But it just fucking ain't. Yeah, mostly, I mean, like I said, most of the people who were accused were mostly women. There were men too, but they were put on trial due to being accused of being witches. And if you're put on trial or accused of being a witch, you're gonna die anyway. I mean, you know what he also does too? He also puts you on a sleep deprivation test. And then he has you shackled to a wall, facing your facing the front, so that he could take a needle and stab you in the back to find the devil's mark. And if you should bleed and scream, then you're not a witch. But are you going to be free? No fucking way. You're going to die anyway. But however, if he stabs you in the back and you don't flinch and you manage to keep your composure and not bleed, then you're a witch. And you're going to die. You're fucked on both ends. I mean, this motherfucker wasn't taking any shit from anyone. I'm sorry. That was just a cruel punishment back then. Yeah, eventually this whole witch finding debacle ended sometime during the Stuart Restoration when they find out that it's all bullshit. And then the Americans eventually did that too with the Salem witch trials years later, decades later. And even that was bullshit too. Now a lot of people are saying to myself, how the hell is this movie horror? Well, okay, there's no supernatural stuff. There's no ghouls. There's no ghosts. There's nothing that goes bump in the night. And Vincent Price is not this sneering, evil guy, twisting his fingers and acting like this. No. Hey, actually, that was a pretty good impression, I have to say. Anyhow, no. He's not doing any of that. He's not doing any of that bullshit. He is toned down and serious. He's not selling toys here. But however, it's just hard for scholars to understand that this movie is loosely based on a fact, making it hard to break down which is accurate and which scenes were hyperbolic. So Price stars as an authoritarian witchfinder named Matthew Hopkins, who ventures through the English countryside, along with his bumbling but equally statistic henchman John Stern, played by Robert Russell, searching for people who may be involved in alleged witchcraft and practicing skills orchestrated by the devil himself. Maybe without the fact of the matter is that maybe there is no devil and that they themselves might be the devil in disguise. I'm sorry. I just like the way how Vincent Price used to talk. So sometimes I might do that sneering voice. So while this is happening, a young soldier who is fighting in the Civil War, I believe he's fighting for Oliver Cromwell, so that means the guy must be a parliamentarian, taking on, of course, the royalists. He goes by the name. He's a coronet who goes by the name of Richard Marshall, played by Ian Ogilvy, was given permission by his superiors to take a leave of absence to be with his lover, Sarah Lowes, played by Hilary Dwyer, the niece of the local priest, the Reverend John Lowes, played by Rupert Davies. When he when the when when the priest greets him, he doesn't just give him his approval. He gives Richard his blessing to marry the lovely Sarah. But he also lays out some strict rules. And he also doesn't really fully take kindly to this Marshall. Because apparently Richard is just a soldier who's killing off people. And because he's a priest, he's an advocate for peace. But since Sarah Lowe's life or her livelihood might be in danger because the priest himself, Father Lowe's, well, Mr. Hopkins is on his trail. And he knows that if she stays around, her life could be in danger. So not only, but he also has some other set of rules for her as well. Yeah, I know, that sounds sexist. But this was the time period, unfortunately, where back in the 1600s, women were inferior. Oh no, I might be executed for saying something like that. But you gotta remember, this is me from 2023. The period this movie took place had these kind of rules, had these kind of restrictions. So I'm not being sexist, I'm being factual. It's a good thing that they added the rising of the Cromwell administration because, once the Civil War ended, Britain was temporarily without a monarch. And actually, Oliver Cromwell would eventually be the leader of England, almost like a prime minister. And that Britain came within a small fraction of almost ending the monarchy. But then, once Oliver Cromwell died, Parliament would eventually be passed over to his son Richard. But then people did not have too much faith in Richard because he was an incompetent. They eventually, I guess, brought back Charles II. He would become coronated as King of England. And Britain was pretty much back in the monarchy. But the monarchy would be less of a powerful enterprise, and that the monarchy and Parliament would be running the country. Scotland and Ireland would eventually also become a part of the Commonwealth of Great Britain. So, I'm glad they kind of brought that up. So, though Price is more famous for his campy, borderline humorous takes on villainy, here he is playing a real life character in Matthew Hopkins. He's being more nuanced in character, but, but also more dangerous in his interrogations, making them more cerebral and authentic by comparison to his previous work. Now, there was a lot of back off camera conundrum that was happening between star Vincent Price and director Michael Reeves. During the filming, Price was not on happy terms with co-writer director Michael Reeves, who took an instant dislike to the film legend. Now, apparently, Reeves originally wanted to cast Donald Pleasance in the lead role of Matthew Hopkins, but American International Pictures forced him to cast Price instead. When Price arrived at Heathrow Airport, Reeves completely snubbed him and didn't even show up to greet him. Instead, the producers came by. I also believe scriptwriter Tom Baker was more than happy to see him, and like I said, he's not to be confused with the Doctor Who Tom Baker. They were more than happy to have Price on board, but Reeves, nope. And he made the atmosphere of him toxic. He feared that Price was going to turn this movie into a camp fest. And he even made him go through several strange initiatives himself to prove that he was worthy to be in his movie. And Price, who was not accustomed to be disrespected by this young 20-something prodigy, as he remained uncooperative on the set, but kept his composure as a way to finish off this movie, to not work with this young man ever again. I mean, even there was a time when Price said to him, "I've been in over 85 movies. What movies have you directed?" And he said, 3 very good ones. Well, I don't know if that sentiment is true, or if he was just being some narcissistic, snobby, young, up-and-coming prick. Unfortunately for Reeves, he died at a very young age of 25 years old from, I believe it was, he overdosed on barbiturates. Yeah, folks, I wouldn't overdo yourself with the barbiturates thing. Okay? It's not worth it. Just stay away. Or at least lay low on them. Now, I don't know whether his death was ruled as a suicide or if it was an accident. But anyhow, he was only 25. His whole life was taken away from him. But underneath such uncompromising hostilities, behind the set, the Witchfinder General is one of Price's more restrained performances in his career. And I think even in the end of the movie, Price and Reeves eventually bonded. And Reeves' take was to make Hopkins feel real by making him have more human traits to his psychological attributes, rather than being a cartoony caricature that would likely be sold as an action figure in toy stores. Price reassured that this character was going to be more toned, serious, and more or less played for not for laughs, not for campy enjoyment, but to be downright serious in his delivery. And I think he succeeded very well. Not to undermine the direction of young Michael Reeves, he seems to have an eye for direction, as the opening scenes are delivered in very raw details, indicating that this is not going to be a pleasant film. In the opening scenes, we see a bunch of people being sentenced to be hung. They're being physically beaten, smacked around, physically abused. We see women screaming. We see children crying. This is not for the faint of heart. If you are of the faint of heart, then get the fuck out of here. But if you are not, or if you are able to withstand this movie, you've been warned. You can thank me later. And though this character was not met with a tactful and graceful demeanor with Price, he was able to convince Price that his way of making Hopkins a convincing villain is keeping him real. And even though this movie also even has some anti-religious undertones, and the ending is not a happy one in spite of the villain's comeuppance, yes, Hopkins does die. He gets chopped up into a billion pieces. Well, no, he gets chopped up with an axe after Richard actually managed to free himself. And then his other soldiers come in and just take their musket and shoot him square in the face. Of course, this ends with Richard getting all pissed off at them. He becomes on the brink of madness. Sarah, eventually terrified by the whole experience, ends up screaming nonstop. Oh my god. I thought this would at least have a bittersweet ending with a happy ending. But at least it didn't fall into that happy ending cliche, because neither our swashbuckling hero and our damsel in distress do not come out pleasant. They eventually fall into the brink of insanity after the whole ordeal, and you just feel bad for them. But it's still a compelling, albeit unsettling, classic movie that delivers quite what you probably would expect. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I do recommend you to see this movie. But if you can't stomach the events that happen, and if you're expecting anything cheery or spontaneous or whimsical, this is not the movie for you. It takes a certain kind of courage to watch a movie of this caliber. But if you can be able to succeed, the more power to you. So if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Witchfinder General from 1968 a 9 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I'll be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Rider saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.